Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development CropTalk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation today, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 19th edition of CropTalk. And today on CropTalk, we're definitely getting into harvest mode, and I thought it'd be a good time to get Dane Fraze on to talk about managing our canola harvest, as a lot of producers are starting to get in the field and look at the canola and seeing whether it's either being as close enough to be swathed or sprayed. So I thought it'd be good to go through some of the things to watch for. So Dane will be on today, and then after that, we'll go to our crop scouting panel, where there's a few more questions that have come in this week, and get them to answer them for us. Before we get started, just a little bit of an update. Start with a harvest update. Winter wheat across the province, about 61% complete. I think yields have been right around the average. I think they're bouncing around from area to area, but I think a lot of producers talking in that 60 to 75 bushel range. So average for the last couple of years, maybe a little bit below average for what we'd like to see as our long-term average. Fall rye, about 74% complete. Again, that crop is yields have been right around the average. Have been hearing some talk about ergot in the fall rye, so that may be an issue that producers are going to have to deal with when it comes to marketing. But again, about average yields for fall rye. Spring wheat harvest, just nicely getting going, about 9% complete. Right now, I'm hearing about average protein. I think guys are talking around that 13% protein that I've been hearing. Some producers are saying that the wheat is piebald, and that may be one of the reasons why we're seeing maybe a little bit lower protein. And yields wise, I'm hearing 50 to 65 range. Again, this is on 9%. So one of the things that maybe is causing some of the early yields to be a little bit lower is some of the crop was it was seeded into cool conditions this spring, and maybe just didn't get off to the start we would normally like it to see. And so maybe some of those early seeded crops are maybe not going to yield maybe quite as good as some of the later seeded crops. So that yet to be determined over the next little while here. Looking at barley, about 13% complete, and getting a lot of different messages on barley yield wise. Some yields average and some yields around average. Quality though has been good. Some producers have been starting to swath barley, trying to get it to ripen in faster, and weather conditions over the last little while here have been I guess good enough to try to bring or to get it to dry in the field and get it off that way. Oats, a little of it being done. Basically, the only stuff that I've seen guys doing are the fields that have been swathed, as a lot of producers aren't desiccating oats anymore. So that might make it a little bit longer for that crop to be out there. Field peas, 43% done, and I think over the next 3 to 4 days here, we're going to see the majority of the peas being completed. And right now, what I'm hearing is right around average yields, anywhere from that 40 to 60 range, I guess is what I've been hearing. And I guess what I wanted to, I had another slide there, sorry about that, but yeah, so yields have been right around average. I think harvest is going to continue on here over the next week, and we're going to definitely see a change next week in these percentages as producers get out into the field. I guess with that, I want to turn the screen over now to Dane, and he can take us through some of the things to look for in harvesting or getting ready for our canola harvest. So Dane, if you're ready, if you can take it over now, please.
Great, thank you, Lionel. Appreciate the update. It's always good to know that harvest is on its way. I always get a little excited when we're out back in the field again, finally, despite all the challenges that a year throws at us. You asked me to discuss pre-harvest canola staging, as a good chunk of the province is just moving into that window where we're looking at swathing or desiccating, as much of the cereal desiccation has already occurred. So we need to look at a few things in order to make accurate assessments there. So swathing, spraying, and seed color change. Triple S. All right, to start with, seed color change is any degree of coloration on the canola seed coat. So that doesn't matter whether it's a speck the size of a pen tip or it's the entire seed, has either brown or black or some variation of color other than green. And that's measured in the percentage of the total number of seeds per plant. Normally, we're looking at the main stem only, but that gives us a good indication of the overall maturity of the plant. So in the photo there, all of those seeds would count as having seed color change, and then we start moving up the main raceme, looking for where that color change stops on those canola seedlings. So those ones would consider to have seed color change, and you can move on from that point. How to check this. This is something that cannot be done from the truck or driving by on the road. It's very deceptive. You'll notice in my presentation, I don't have any photos of what a canola field looks like for seed color change. This is exclusively done on the ground, cracking open pods, splitting them open, and looking at where seed color change is at. So to evaluate, look at the main stem. That's generally going to be the largest stem, single biggest one, one that has all the branches coming off of it. If your crop is a little bit thinner, it may be harder to find, given that there's more branches coming off the side, and you may have to evaluate a couple branches just to determine. But if your plant stand is in that 5 to 7 plants per square foot, you generally only have one main stem with 1 or 2 branches, so it should be easier to find. So start at the bottom and move your way up. Canola will ripen from the bottom up, same way as it flowered. So those are the oldest flowers on the bottom. You can begin evaluating seed color change 10 days after flowering is complete. And we're going to look at the plant in thirds. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse or not. Let's go like this. So we're going to look at the bottom third here. All of these seeds on this main stem have seed color change. They're brown, they're black. We're moving on. Perfect. We've got 30% seed color change there. Moving up to the next third, all of these seeds again have seed color change. Not all of them in the pods, but there's certainly some in here that have started to turn color. We count that as initiating seed color change. If we're 2/3 up the way of the plant, more or less, we're between 50 to 60%, in this case probably 66% seed color change. That is in that optimal window for swathing and the first applications of pre-harvest glyphosate. Further up to this plant here, we're still seeing stuff in the green, but that is to be expected at 60% SCC. I can't advance myself now. No. Perfect. Okay, as I mentioned, we don't have photos from the road because pod color can be deceiving. I shamelessly swiped this image on the left from Twitter. Meg Desjardins out of Vulcan, Alberta, with Bayer Crop Science posted this earlier this week. I thought it was a very nice visual image to show that different pod color certainly doesn't mean seed color change. If you look at pods 1 and 2, they look to be the most ripe on the surface. They're the brownest, and that will give the brownest looking field. But look a little closer, those seeds are still green. They don't have any evidence of seed color change. However, pod number 4 does. Being a little bit greener, it does have fully turned seeds, and that would, if 60% of that plant had that coloration, it would be in that optimal window. So it's just a reminder to get out to the field and actually crack open those pods, not look at the road. And on the right, we have some classic symptoms of sunburn in canola. Those hot sunny days we've been having for the past 2-3 weeks with high UV index and low cloud cover can discolor pod surfaces fairly quickly, leading to that anthocyanin concentration on the pod surfaces, giving it that purplish brown color. That does not generally affect the seed, and you're still going to have to look at those seeds inside to see if the seed color change is initiated. Pod color is not an indicator of seed color change. As I mentioned, those hot, dry days, as we have forecasted, will rapidly help turn seed color. If the weather turns all of a sudden, we have cool, humid, rainy, overcast days, that'll slow seed color change, but it will not stop it. At the low end of that spectrum, SCC can advance about 1.2, 1.3% a day, but these hot, dry, high UV days that we've had, it's certainly on the higher end of that spectrum. It's going around 2% per day. So where we're expecting that it might take 10 to 15 days to reach 60% SCC from the initiation of seed color change, with the warm, dry days forecasted, that could be less. We might be looking at 10 days or less to have that plant move from 0% seed color change to 60% seed color change. So do be vigilant in your fields. It may be going quicker than you expect, so that may negate the need for a pre-harvest herbicide application if there are some spots in your field that are a little bit more uneven. All right, moving on to swath timing. I've talked about 60% seed color change for swathing a number of times. What happens if we cut too early? That can lock in green seeds, lowering the grade. The image on the right is straight off the Canadian Grain Commission website, showing the grade discount for distinctly green seeds. Anything less than 2% green will achieve that #1 Canada grade, providing all other factors are good. You have a little bit of wiggle room for #2, but as soon as you cross that 6% seed or green, distinctly green seed, you can drop into a #3 or sample very, very quickly. So make sure that all the effort you put into the crop throughout the year pays off, and don't rush into getting that crop harvested if it's still a little on the green side. Additionally, by cutting early, you're not allowing full dry matter accumulation in those canola seeds. So they end up being a little lighter than normal, and you may get more of those peppercorn type seeds where it's just a small shriveled seed that's lost its moisture or was cut green and doesn't count towards your total yield, just blows out the back of the combine. So there's a yield benefit of 8% or more by delaying swathing from that 30-40% to that 50-60% seed color change. So that certainly does make a difference, holding off a little bit later in the year. Some data here from 1992. So it's approaching 30 years old right now, but the principle still stands. The later the harvest date or the cut date, the greater the dry matter accumulation. So if we're looking here on the blue line, it's a swath date of July 23rd. The date doesn't matter so much, but the progression is what I want you to look at. The later the date, the higher the seed weight. Seed weight measured here in grams per 1,000 seeds. We've got a fairly light seed. If it's swathed earlier, gets a little heavier as you move to July 30th, heavier still by a later swath date, and that standing crop has the heaviest swath weight. We've heard that anecdotally and through research from producers for the past 5 years already. As pod shatter tolerant lines become more and more common, producers are letting them stand in the field much, much later. And as a result, whether the variety has inherent genetic advantages or not, the later the crop is allowed to stand in the field and ripen, the higher quality that seed will be and the heavier it will be. And despite yield being nearly identical, the weight of that seed is higher, leading to a heavier bushel weight and more profit in your pocket at the end of the day. All right, so now moving on to pre-harvest herbicides. These do have some more restrictive limitations, so we'll go through that in more detail. There's 3 registered options on canola right now. There's the heat brands recommended with glyphosate, dicot brands, group 22, commonly Reglone, and then there's a number of generics, and then glyphosate alone. We do not recommend glyphosate alone for Roundup Ready or TrueFlex canola, given that it's the same herbicide system and you're not actually going to be affecting your canola in any way. And additionally, there's other problems with using glyphosate alone. Using straight shot of Roundup on mature weed, perennial weed, trying to dry that down and kill it off doesn't bode well for resistance buildup in the seed production there. So that is certainly a concern, and having glyphosate alone just acts as additional selection pressure. So certainly tank mix where possible. Now, a few pro tips on pre-harvest aids. We broke this down into columns. I'd like you to pay attention to the first line, the crop stage. Glyphosate is the same, glyphosate alone would be the same as your swath timing, 50 to 60% seed color change. That equates to about 30% moisture content, excuse me, 30% moisture content, and that's where we need to be because the glyphosate label is in fact for seed moisture content, not seed color change, but those two equate to each other fairly nicely. One over, heat LQ. You might notice a change on the heat LQ label and recommended rate from previous years. BASF has since increased the recommended crop stage for a heat LQ application. We're looking at 80% SCC right now instead of the previously labeled 70 to 75%. So that number does increase a little bit, and as a result, the heat LQ label becomes more restrictive than glyphosate. So if you were tank mixing the two together, go with a more restrictive label, you would spray at 80% seed color change. There's been some work done to show that it allows more dry matter accumulation, and it does work effectively at a higher seed color change. So that is the recommended application rate there. Moving over to the Diquat family of herbicides, we're looking at 90% brown seed, and that's not seed color change, that's brown seed. So we're looking at all the stems, not just the canola seed on the main stem. We're looking at those side branches as well. By looking at the main stem only, those side branches could be greener, and given the fast-acting nature of Diquat, it does risk locking in chlorophyll in those side branches, in those greener seeds. So we're looking at the entire plant when we're rating for a Reglone or a Diquat application, not just seed color change on the main stem. That is the important distinction there. Dry down speed on all of them are listed there. Glyphosate is the longest, between 7 and 21 days, kind of weather dependent. Diquat can be as short as 4 to 5 days post-application, just given the nature of cell disruption and the way that particular herbicide works. The heat LQ and glyphosate combo is somewhere in between, generally between 7 and 12 days. Different goals are in mind for each of your products. If you look at that Diquat, you need to have a very even, relatively consistent crop canopy, because it's going to provide that very fast dry down of green plant material. There are grass green canola plants in that crop stand and then dead ripe ones on the other end. Perhaps Diquat is not the best option. You might be looking at more of a heat LQ or glyphosate application, or just letting that crop stand mature on its own. We are still August 19th today, so there is hopefully some decent weather still in our harvest window that will allow that crop to dry down further before having to rush into an immediate decision like that. With Diquat, again, you will want to use high water volume, up to 20 gallons an acre, just to almost irrigate that crop, as it were. Because it's a contact herbicide, you will need to get a lot of water down to make sure that that product works effectively. On the other end of the spectrum, glyphosate can be fairly weather dependent. Water volume isn't as critical there since it is more systemic. All right, moving on to the pre-harvest intervals and keeping it clean. There's 2 website links at the top of your screen. Definitely check those out to make use of the canola staging guide, as well as the spray to swath calculator. Certain products are more restrictive, and this goes for other crops, not just canola as well. Canola doesn't have very clear-cut pre-harvest intervals on those 3 products I just discussed. But for using glyphosate, for example, on cereals, there is a pre-harvest interval of 7 days. There must be a week between spray and swath, or straight harvest in that case. Canola is more dependent on seed color change and seed moisture content. So do check the labels or check that website to verify what products you want to use and when you may be able to apply it. So pre-harvest of, or pardon me, 50 to 60% seed color change, as I mentioned earlier, equates to about 30% seed moisture content in canola. And that's measured in the least mature part of the field. So you want to make sure that you are looking at those areas that are a little bit further behind, because you're not worried about the stuff that's more advanced. It's the stuff that's behind is what's going to hold you back. But take an estimation, visual estimation of the entire field, figure out what percent of that field is more delayed, and then make your best estimate and judgment based on that. If you're having trouble evaluating your field, contact your agronomist or the agronomists listening. Look at those restricted parts of the field, or if you have any questions, get in touch with any Manitoba Ag farm production extension specialist. All right, and that's all I have on pre-harvest staging for canola. Happy harvesting. I've heard yields are ranging between 40 and 50 bushel an acre right now on the early harvested canola. Time will tell, and that's likely going to get started towards the end of this week and into next. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
Hey, Dane. First of all, thanks for the presentation, and we do have a couple questions that have come here. First one regarding, I guess, staging-wise, temperature and swathing, does that change your decision of seed color change?
Temperature, no. Heat and high UV does advance seed color change quicker than if it were, say, cool and humid. But the temperature itself shouldn't play a role in the factor in swathing. If you're using a pod shatter tolerant line, that becomes certainly less of a concern, given that that variety has the genetic capability of holding onto that seed. If you're using the traditional canola line or canola hybrid, temperature that does seem to work well if you're running a little on the late side and you need to swath in the cool of the evening or overnight. But temperature isn't your main concern there. It's actually the moisture in the air and humidity. The dew is what's going to help that canola plant keep those pods intact and slide through the swather easier. The temperature itself isn't the main concern. It's rather the moisture.
Okay, and maybe just a follow-up to that, what about temperature and spraying?
Temperature and spraying. Yes, there are certain factors you want to consider. Dicot works best under those high temperatures, mid-20s certainly, and high light conditions. So a bright sunny day, you're going to get a very sharp and fast kill with the dicot herbicides. With heat and glyphosate, it's a little bit less light and temperature dependent. Certainly target those warm conditions. I mean, spraying below 15 degrees isn't going to work you any favors. But lower temperatures, less than 25 degrees, tend to work better. Warmer than 25, approaching 30. Glyphosate does tend to not be as effective, or it tends to burn off quicker in the crop and not get into the canopy as easily. And your canola uptake or your plant uptake of that herbicide will be a little more limited.
Okay, and this one comes from me. What about the, we used to go by rolling the seeds between your fingers. Does that still apply?
Yes, it does. If you are able to crush the canola seeds between your fingers when they're still green, that's way too early, definitely. If you're able to roll the seed between your fingers without it crushing, that's an indicator that it's approaching a 30 to 40% seed color change lower on the plant. It's not, obviously, if the canola plant or the seed is still green, it hasn't reached any seed color change at that point, but look up and down that main stem to see if you're seeing any color change at all. When you're on that rolling stage, seed moisture tends to be about 40 to 50% instead of that optimal 30% seed moisture. So give it a couple more days and you'll be very, very close to that appropriate swath time.
Okay, so if you're able to roll the top pods between your fingers and they stay firm, you're probably pretty close still.
Yeah, if you're able to roll the top pods, that's exactly right. It takes you 2 seconds longer. Just pull a pod from further down that main stem and check there as well to see if there's any seed color change.
Great. Okay, thanks, Dane. Lots of good information there, and I think we'll be seeing a lot of producers out in the field here over the next little while making those decisions. So thanks again for the update today. And Lori, if you could turn the screen over to me, we will get started with our crop scouting panel. So there's our crop scouting panel, and we have a couple guests today on as well that'll be answering a couple questions that have been coming in. So again, there's the email address for Lori and myself. So if you have questions, please feel free to send them to us, and we'll do our best to get them on and get them answered for you for the next week's webinar. So the first one goes to Ann Kirk, and we're into harvesting wheat. And last year, or the last couple of years, falling number has become something that producers are hearing about. And I thought maybe we could get Ann to address what does the falling number mean in wheat and what conditions affect it.
Sure. So falling number is used to evaluate the amount of sprout damage in wheat, and it's measured by the amount of alpha amylase in the sample. So alpha amylase is the enzyme that's found in sprout damaged wheat, and if germination occurs, there's a dramatic increase of this enzyme. So alpha amylase is important because bakers need it to break down the starch into sugars, which feed the yeast. So if germination happens, those sugars are already being broken down, and the wheat obviously isn't as good for baking. So what happens is the wheat sample is ground up, it's heated, and then the falling number is the time in seconds that it takes for the stir or a plunger to fall through the hot slurry of ground wheat. And if more alpha amylase is present, the plunger falls more quickly. So the falling number is actually the amount of seconds that it takes for that plunger to fall through the wheat. And generally, wheat shipments must achieve about a falling number of about 300 seconds or higher. And in Canada, most of our wheat, like during the breeding process, has a falling number of about 350 to 500. So in a year where we don't see a lot of sprout damage, then we should be fine. But if we do start seeing sprout damage in the wheat, or if it's sitting in the swath for a long time, then we'd be more concerned about having a decrease in that falling number.
Okay, so the higher the number, the better.
Yes, the higher the better.
Okay. Great. Okay, so I actually think the next question is going to go to you as well, Ann. Talking to some producers, and they say they're seeing heads standing above the crop. What is your, take on what's happening out in the field when you see something like the picture there?
So there could be a couple of reasons why this is happening. I probably think the most common would be that there's probably a few seeds from another variety that have been mixed in with that seed lot. Another explanation could be that the wheat is still segregating for height, and this isn't that common, but it could happen under stressful conditions that we do see that segregation height more prevalent in the wheat. But I do think that probably the most common reason would be that there's just, a different variety mixed in with that seed lot for whatever reason. And it's probably not that much, but when you do see a couple of heads sticking up, it probably looks like more of the seed than it actually is.
Okay. Somebody once told me that they might be reverting back to their parentage. Does that make any sense, or is that with the varieties we have now and the years they've been growing, we probably wouldn't see that?
Yeah, they would be pretty stable, and I think I would expect that they'd be pretty stable, and I think that them segregating for height still. So like when you do cross two varieties, even if the varieties are similar height, you are going to end up with wheat. So you make your cross and you have like 10,000 wheat lines, which is pretty common early on in the breeding cycle. You'll see a wide variety of heights. Those two parents, even if they have similar heights, are going to produce a variety of offspring. So we would see some of that segregation for height. And I don't think it would be common, but that could be that is another reason why we would see different heights across a wheat field.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anne. Okay, the next question is going to go to Manika, and Manika works in the crop diagnostics lab in Winnipeg and gets several samples coming into her on a yearly basis, and has been getting quite a few samples of water parsnip and water hemlock. So I thought it'd be good to get Anne on. She was able to put some slides together distinguishing the two. So Manika, if you want to take over and maybe give us maybe a bit of a background, and then maybe just describe the two different plants to us.
Sure, thank you, Lionel. Good morning, everyone. This is Manika from Crop Diagnostics Center here in Winnipeg. Let me make my own statement on weeds. Weeds are weeds as per our definition. That's, we say it weed at a particular time when we don't need that. So we don't know when and where one becomes a weed, even a person. Beautiful canola can be a weed in a soybean field. So likewise, there are a lot of weeds in the field that people have been coming into contact with, and there are poisonous and non-poisonous weeds. So what we have been seeing lately is, like, I got around nine samples of umbelliferous, that is the umbel type flowering type plant. So I got that, and it looked like maybe a water parsnip or it's a water hemlock. And water hemlock is a very poisonous plant, especially for like animals and dogs, especially like it produces, it's a toxin. It produces toxin which can be fatal within 15 to 6 hours. Like something like a small dog could be fatal within 15 minutes. So that has been reported. So it's very crucial for maybe and also like what I think is God has sent that weed for us to like keep ourselves awake and also be mindful of our surroundings. That's what it goes with the weeds. And here, in this picture, what you see is this particular one is the leaf of a water parsnip. And if you see in a later in the like plant development, you will see flowers of similar kind. And umbel family, we have lots of plants which are poisonous and which are very nice. Like a lot of spices are umbels, and a lot of poisonous plants are umbels. So water parsnip and water hemlock. Water hemlock is one of the poisonous ones. And this particular leaf that you are seeing on the picture now is a water parsnip. This is a compound leaf, but has only a single pinnet. Like it has only it's a leaf and it's a compound leaf. It goes 1, 1, 1. So it is called singly pinnet. And also, if you see it under the microscope or any dissecting scopes, such as scopes, you can see the veins, the leaf veins are not very clear, and it doesn't go to the edge of the plant. Then, Lionel, if you can move it a little bit down, now the next leaf. Yeah, this one. This is the leaf. It's a single leaf of a water hemlock, and this is compound leaf. Both are compound leaf, like water parsnip and water hemlock both have compound leaves, but in this compound it's compounded again. So it's 3 like 1, 2, 3 It's 3 times compounded in here. So it's a compound leaf with another compound. So it is like 2 to 3 times pinnate, because it's the shape of the leaf is pinnate. And here, like if you look it under the microscope, you will see, even with your naked eye, you can see the leaf veins going straight to the edge, and it is sharp. So this is the water hemlock. And also, like if you can, so when it's in the like seedling stage, when people go out to the field, they will not know whether this is a water hemlock or water parsnip. So the difference between the leaves will tell you what is like, and how you can differentiate between two. And also then we can go to the flower a little later, like in the stage of flowering, the plant will flower, and that time you will see both are umbel and both have same sort of inflorescence you can see in there. And what the first look, how you can see is on water parsnip, you will see a flat top. The inflorescence they are called the rays. All the rays are in a flat like. So you can it's kind of cut it. And in water hemlock, it is like an umbrella, like one will be a little taller, one will be a little down. So you will see it's gradually sloping down. So that is the first impression that you will get. And afterwards, when you go next to, like, I mean, you should never touch your plant like bare-handed. You have to have gloves and long sleeve clothings. And in water parsnip, you will see bracts all around on big main umbel and also on the side umbels. These are the, like, I mean, I cannot show you, like, these are the bracts. All those bracts you will find on each and every umbel, every ray that you get in there. And in water hemlock, the main umbel will not have that. And the smaller umbels on the side umbels, they might have a little rudimentary, like smaller bracts on them. So that is that's how you can differentiate between. So one is the shape, and the other is the bract for the flower. So it's very easy in the field. You go there, just like with a stick or something, you just flip the flower, the top of the flower, then you will see whether there are bracts or not. Then you can say, okay, this is poisonous, this is not poisonous. Likewise, a lot of people have come across giant hogweed too, because that is also in the same family. It's umbelliferous family. It used to be umbelliferæ, now it's called Apiaceae. It looks like umbel, but the flowers are still umbel. We call it umbel, but I don't know why they put it Apiaceae. It doesn't match it, but still it is Apiaceae. But then that also has a similar kind of flower. If you see from far, you will not be able to, like in the first instance, you cannot say that is water parsnip, that's water hemlock, it's giant hogweed, or it's a cow parsnip. So there are so many. So how you can differentiate between the water hemlock and the giant hogweed is again with the leaves. There are some other like distinction features with the flowers too, but then like leaves are the most distinctive in a vegetative state or in a flowering state. The giant hogweed have a big lobed leaves, whereas whether it is water parsnip or water hemlock will have ferny type leaves. They look like ferns, especially for the water hemlock. So that's the difference between all these umbel poisonous plants. did you have any other questions or Lina?
Yeah, one question was, where would these plants be located? Do they have a preference to growing in certain areas?
I got a few from market area in Port Isla Prairie. I think it's towards the western part of the province. Like, and I got maybe 6, 7 from Verdun and Souris, that side. So, but
Okay.
I found, like, I mean, they found both water parsnip and water hemlock in the same field, because they brought me one first and I said, like, this is water parsnip. They said, like, oh, we have something else too. So they brought in from the same field, same the legal land description, and it was the water hemlock. So because these plants, they like the same habitat. It's a kind of little bit wet, marshy, or a little bit wet soil. So it's the western part of this province, yeah, southwest.
Okay, and yeah, no, okay, so that's good. So that covers that one. So thanks, Monica. And I think the next question is going to go to another new member to the panel, Tim Clark. He works in the livestock side of Manitoba Ag, and was wanting to get him to discuss how water hemlock can affect cattle, and if it can, or how can it be fed if it is found in some hay.
Yeah, so the hemlocks in general, they prefer wet meadows. So we're going to find them in areas throughout the province that have wet meadows. And the hemlocks as a group of plants are considered extremely toxic, extremely poisonous. They contain a toxin called sicutoxin. And so sicutoxin, it causes the animals to have a seizure. They stop breathing. The heart stops in generally 15 minutes to a couple of hours. And the roots of the plant are the most toxic. The foliage has less of the sicutoxin in it. And the roots, they have what is a yellowish, oily liquid in them. And if you can pull the roots out, that yellowish, oily liquid, when it's exposed to the air, it turns a reddish brown color and emits a smell of raw parsnip. And so that's how we can identify it if we can get the roots out of the ground. There are kind of two subspecies, poison hemlock. And poison hemlock is a taproot, and it has a small bulb on the taproot just below ground level. The small bulb is about the size of a small marble, or like in diameter, it would be around the diameter of a dime. It's not quite round though. And it's a taproot. The poison hemlock is a taproot, so it will pull out easily if we grab the foliage and pull on it. Keep in mind, it's generally in wet meadows, so the soil is moist and you've got a taproot, and so it will generally pull out more readily than something with a fibrous root. And when cattle in particular, when they graze, they cut off the plant by wrapping their tongue around the plant and ripping it upwards against their bottom teeth. So the poison hemlock, because it's a taproot and it pulls out easily, they can more easily pull that plant out of the ground. And if they consume the bulbs, it would only take probably 2 or 3 of these small bulbs to kill a cow. So the concern this time of year is when the pastures are getting chewed off on the high ground, then the cattle start going to maybe some of the lower ground, because that's what's left for vegetation. And if you have the poison hemlock there, it pulls out easily and they can consume it. So this is the time of year when we most often see poisoning of livestock as a consequence of the hemlock. There's also another subspecies called water hemlock, and that has fibrous roots. So it would not pull out of the ground as readily as the tap-rooted poison hemlock. And the foliage has quite a bit less of the toxin in it than does the roots. So if we're haying it, we may get away with feeding that feed. You could try and avoid pulling the roots out of the ground when you're haying it by having a really sharp cutter bar and cutting it with like a sickle type implement rather than a disc type implement. Like a disc vine might tend to pull the roots out of the ground more than a sycamore. So those are some of the suggestions I have. Is there any questions, Lionel?
No, go ahead.
Ask, this is Manika. Which one is more toxic, you think? Poison hemlock or water hemlock?
They're probably equally toxic, but just because of the nature of the taproot root and the fibrous roots, it's more easy for a cow to pull out the taprooted poison hemlock.
Because the 9 samples that I received, probably they are water hemlock, because I didn't get any roots. Like they had, they had tried to pull, but then they had, like, the stem had broken at the edge where the crown area is.
Yeah.
And also one had a huge amount of soil in it, looked like a fibrous root system.
Right. So like a cow grazing, when they pull that butt on the water hemlock, and they're likely to not rip the whole root out of the ground, and that's why they're less likely to consume the root of water hemlock than a poison hemlock. I've seen cattle graze poison, like look at grazing poison hemlock, and you can pull it out pretty easily. And like I said, they rip off the plants. They don't have top teeth. They wrap their tongue around it, and then they pull upwards, and the bottom teeth shear off the foliage.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tim and Manika. That was some good information on a weed or a plant that we don't normally see a lot of or hear a lot about. So thanks for that information today.
You're welcome.
Next question is for John Hurd. Had a producer talking about piebald in his wheat. What, in your opinion, causes it, and does it affect protein?
Okay, thanks, Lionel. And I'm sure Anne may have some physiology to talk about here too. I'm a simple soil fertility guy, so when I see piebald, that is an indication of severely starchy kernels resulting because there's been inadequate nitrogen to fill those kernels and make protein. And so it's usually a sign when the plant, whether lack of fertilizer or lack of soil nitrogen, the plant has produced yield, but not had an adequate nitrogen supply to produce protein. And so we have kind of guidelines or thumb rules in Manitoba that were developed years ago, that if your protein in your spring wheat is testing 13.2 to 13.5, or if it's testing below 13.2, then that nitrogen supply was inadequate for the yield potential that was produced. And so if you're consistently getting lower protein like that, well, then it's a bit of a signal to move up your nitrogen regime. For winter wheat, it's, I think, 11.5 is our benchmark value. If you produce less than 11.5 protein, then your nitrogen supply is less than the yield potential you're producing. So, but the piebald, and do you have anything to input on that?
No, your comment sounded good to me, John.
Okay. Anne worked in Saskatchewan for a few years, and I think it's a worse problem if you get it in durum wheat. But I think here we're probably going to have a lot of good quality wheat, what's coming off now. So Lionel, maybe we'll be able to blend some of our stuff with your piebald stuff in Western Manitoba and make it real good.
I guess my only comment would be I was combining our organic wheat last night and it definitely looks piebald, so and nitrogen deficient in the field. So I have a little bit of experience with, you know, having a crop that looks like that for sure.
So here's the follow-up question to that then. Producers put on, this guy had 80 pounds of N, 40 pounds of phosphate, 20 pounds of potash, that's actual, and he's still seeing this. So how much higher does he need to go?
Well, I'm not sure what type of yield did he produce on this field, Lionel?
60 bushel range.
Well, 60 bushel, our thumb rule would say that he needs a nitrogen supply of 2 to 2.5 pounds of nitrogen per bushel. So 60, so he'd need 120 to 150 pounds of nitrogen supply. So I guess my question to him is, you know, he may have lowballed the nitrogen application, but you know, maybe this guy soil tests and maybe he had 60 to 80 pounds residual. I don't know that, but failing having a good supply residual, to me, the math is telling me he simply produced higher yield than what he had fertilized for. So time to step up your nitrogen application rates.
Okay, and so is that something we're going to see more of when we're looking at some of these new varieties that have potentials for 80 bushel an acre? You know, are we going to keep increasing our N and still topping up our yields and still having the protein problem?
That's what we've been saying for 5 years. Yep.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. Lori, was there a question that came in? I seem to have lost it off my screen.
Yes, I do have one here actually. Water versus poisonous hemlock. Poisonous hemlock is taproot and has small bulbs. Roots more poisonous than leaves, pulls out easily, but I didn't catch how to distinguish the difference water hemlock. Tim, could you confirm the differences, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, basically the type of root is what distinguishes them. The poison hemlock has this tap root with a little bulb just below ground level, and the water hemlock has more fibrous roots, so it wouldn't pull out as easily.
Okay, great. I think that answers that. And that's all I have, Lionel.
Okay, yeah, no, I had it up on my screen here and I lost it. So, okay, I think that's it for the questions today. And I'd like to thank our panel again. Just a few slides to go through here and today's session. Again, the crop reports are still being done. Can easily keep on top of how the harvest is going by going to these reports. Also, if there's any disease or insect issues, the insect and disease updates are still happening. Manitoba Hay Listing Service, if you're short of hay or if you got hay for sale, definitely put your go to that link and get your what you have for sale or what you're looking for from there. If you're looking for something or you got questions, here's the Farm Production Extension Specialist for the province, their phone numbers, so please get a hold of them. And that does it for this week. I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and we'll see you next week, August the 26th.